He repaired her translator. Her first words nearly knocked him off his feet. The particle welder died in Darius Webb's hands for the third time that morning, and he allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Another piece of equipment that would take weeks to truly fix, another small victory in a war of inches. He set it aside with the practiced care of a man who knew he was always being watched, then reached for the next item in the endless queue of broken alien technology that defined his days. 8 months in this place. 8 months since the raid on New Providence Colony, since they'd dragged him from the wreckage of the engineering bay he'd tried to defend. 8 months of forced labor in the belly of Overlord Tarn Velsharn's prison fortress, repairing the very weapons that kept humanity in chains. The workshop hummed with the sound of poorly calibrated machinery, his handiwork, though no one seemed to notice. Sweat traced down his spine despite the recycled air. The space was industrial and cold, all gunmetal surfaces and harsh lighting that turned shadows into accomplices. He kept his head down, his hands steady, his rebellion invisible. Boot steps echoed on the metal deck plating, heavy, confident strides he'd learned to recognize over the past few months. Darius didn't look up immediately, didn't give away his anticipation. When he finally raised his eyes, she stood in the doorway. The guard, the one with green skin that seemed to catch the light differently than her fellow soldiers, more olive where theirs was gray-green. Taller than him by half a head, built like a blade, all lean muscle and deadly grace. Her dark copper hair was pulled back from features that were startlingly humanoid despite the slight differences in bone structure, the luminescence in her amber eyes. She carried something cupped in both hands like it was precious, fragile. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than necessary. This had become their routine over the months, these moments of silent acknowledgement that felt like secrets, even though nothing was said. She'd been present for most of his work assignments, watching with an intensity that should have unsettled him. Instead, it had become the most human thing in this place. She approached the workbench and set down the device. A translator unit, standard military issue from the look of it, but the casing was scorched and the crystalline matrix inside had fractured. She gestured to it, then to the collar at her own throat, where a similar device should have rested. The movements were elegant, deliberate, almost like a dance. Darius picked up the broken translator, turning it over in his hands. The damage was extensive, not battlefield trauma, but something more insidious. Degradation. The kind that happened when someone had been running a device far beyond its designed parameters for far too long. "You've been without this for a while," he said, knowing she couldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone conveyed the question. She nodded, then made a series of gestures. Her fingers moved in patterns he'd started to recognize, numbers maybe, time. She held up both hands, fingers spread, then closed them and opened them again. Months, many months. Preston Hayes, the only other human in the workshop, glanced over from his station. His expression was hollow, worn down by captivity, in a way that Darius refused to let happen to himself. Preston had stopped fighting, stopped hoping. He'd become exactly what their captors wanted. Darius turned back to the translator, spreading his tools across the workbench. The guard, he'd never learned her name, had never been able to ask, leaned against the wall nearby. Watching. Always watching. He worked in silence, the familiar rhythm of repair settling over him like meditation. Micro-welder to reforge the fractured crystal pathways, calibration probe to test the harmonic frequencies. Replacement circuitry scavenged from 3 other broken units. His hands moved with precision born of necessity and natural talent. She moved closer as he worked, near enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, warmer than human standard. Her breathing was slightly faster than his, her metabolism burning hotter. He'd noticed these details over the months, cataloged them without meaning to. The translator began to hum as power cycled through repaired pathways. Darius made minute adjustments, his focus absolute. The device had been sabotaged. He was certain now. Someone had deliberately damaged it, made sure it would fail slowly enough that the degradation seemed natural. "Why would someone break your translator?" he asked, still working, still not expecting an answer. Her hand landed on his shoulder, warm, firm. When he looked up, her amber eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that stopped his breath. She was trying to tell him something, desperately trying to communicate across the void of language. The translator chirped. Once, twice. The harmonic frequency locked into alignment, and Darius felt the satisfaction of a job done right, war with his instinct to leave it just slightly broken, just unreliable enough to be useful. But something in her eyes made him finish the repair properly. He lifted the device, held it up for her inspection. She took it with trembling fingers, the first time he'd ever seen her hands shake, and attached it to the collar mount at her throat. The translator's lights cycled from red to amber to green. She opened her mouth, closed it, her throat worked as she swallowed. "I've been trying to tell you for 3 months," she said, and her voice was like smoke and steel, accented but clear. "I'm not one of them. I'm resistance. I know what you've been doing to the equipment. I've been covering for you, redirecting suspicion." Darius's tools clattered to the workbench. Preston had gone rigid at his station, eyes wide. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been embedded here for 2 years waiting for an asset like you, someone smart enough, brave enough. I have an escape plan. I've been trying to tell you for months that I need your help. That we could..." The lights in the workshop shifted from white to red. An alarm began to wail, low and ominous. Overlord Tarn Velsharn's voice boomed through the facility's speakers, the translation matrix rendering his words in cold, precise English. "Attention all personnel. The prisoner repair technician has successfully restored the translator unit of Guard Operative Raina Velsharn. Surveillance has confirmed her treasonous communications. Raina Velsharn is hereby declared traitor to the Empire. Security teams are authorized to execute on site. The human technician is to be terminated immediately as a conspirator." Raina's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her fingers were iron, her eyes wild. "Run," she said, "run now." She yanked him toward the door as the first blast from a plasma rifle scored the air where his head had been a moment before. Preston screamed. The workshop erupted into chaos. Darius ran. Raina's hand locked around his wrist, his world narrowing to the sound of her breathing and the thunder of boots converging from every direction. Everything he'd carefully built over 8 months, the patience, the planning, the invisible rebellion, was burning down around him. And somehow, with her pulling him through corridors he'd only seen under guard, her voice finally clear in his ears after months of silent longing, he felt more alive than he had since they'd dragged him from New Providence. The real fight was just beginning. Raina pulled him left at the intersection, her grip never loosening. Plasma fire traced the walls behind them, superheating metal until it glowed. Darius's lungs burned as he struggled to match her pace. She moved like water, flowing around corners with combat-trained grace. Her free hand had already drawn a sidearm, and she fired backward without looking, 3 precise shots that bought them seconds. "Service corridor," she gasped, shoulder-checking a maintenance panel. It gave way with protesting metal. "Go." Darius ducked into the narrow passage, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Emergency strips cast everything in sickly yellow. Pipes and conduits lined the walls, vibrating with frequencies that set his teeth on edge. Some of those vibrations were his doing, subtle miscalibrations eating away at the prison's infrastructure. Raina squeezed in behind him, sealing the panel. In the confined space, her body pressed against his back, her breath hot against his neck. "Straight for 50 meters, she said, "then down the maintenance shaft. Can you climb?" An explosion rocked the corridor outside. Voices shouted in the harsh language of her people. "Yes," Darius said, "I can climb." The shaft gaped before them, descending into darkness. Raina swung onto the ladder without pause. Darius followed, his hands finding purchase on warm metal. Above them, an access panel exploded inward, and guards poured into the shaft. "Drop," Raina commanded. She released her grip and fell. Darius's heart seized before he saw her catch herself 3 meters down on a service platform. He let go and dropped beside her. She caught him, steadying him with hands on his waist, and for one suspended moment they were pressed together, her eyes locked on his. Plasma fire rained down the shaft. Reyna shoved him through the platform's access hatch and followed, sealing it behind them. They were in a maintenance tunnel with actual standing room. The air was thick with coolant and something sharp, chemical propellant from fuel lines overhead. Darius recognized this level, the deep infrastructure that kept everything running. Reyna sagged against the wall, her chest heaving. In the emergency lighting, her skin shimmered with perspiration. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I never wanted it to happen like this. I had a plan, a careful extraction. But your repair was too good, and surveillance caught me speaking before I could." "You have nothing to apologize for," Darius said. "If you hadn't been covering for me, I'd have been dead months ago." She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that had been building since the first time she'd stood watch while he worked. Recognition, understanding, want. "We need to keep moving," she said, but neither of them moved. "Where are we going?" "The old detention blocks. Section 7, scheduled for demolition, structurally unsound, no one patrols there." "Because they're structurally unsound." "Yes." Reyna's mouth quirked, then she pushed off the wall and started jogging. Darius followed, his mind working through the problem. Section 7 meant the eastern perimeter, the side that overlooked. "The fuel depot," he said. "The prison sits on top of a fuel depot." Reyna glanced back, smile unmistakable. "Not just any depot. The primary fueling station for the entire sector fleet. Tarn built this prison here deliberately. No one would dare attack with that much volatile material underneath. It's also a vulnerability." "Yes." They reached a junction where the walls showed visible stress fractures. Water dripped from overhead. The entire structure groaned around them. "The sabotage," Darius said slowly. "You said you were covering for me, but I was also cataloging every piece of damaged equipment, every system you compromised," Reyna finished. "Environmental controls, power distribution, structural integrity monitors. You've been brilliant, Darius. This entire facility is a house of cards, and you've been pulling them out one by one." His name in her voice sent heat through his chest. They'd never exchanged names, and hearing her say it felt intimate in a way that made him acutely aware of every point where their bodies had touched. "How do you know my name?" "I've known everything about you since the day you arrived. Darius Webb, engineering specialist, New Providence Colony. Defended the settlement for 18 hours against overwhelming force. You're famous in resistance circles. They call you the Providence Ghost." "I was just doing my job." "You were doing more than that." The tunnel opened into a vast space. They stood at the edge of what had once been a detention block, but structural failures had collapsed entire sections of the ceiling. Through the gaps overhead, he could see the underside of the prison's main levels, and beyond those, way beyond, the faint shimmer of containment fields surrounding the fuel depot. Reyna led him to a sheltered alcove formed by fallen support beams. She finally released his wrist, and he immediately missed the contact. "We're safe here for a few hours," she said, checking her weapon. "They won't look in a condemned section." "Gone where?" "First, we're opening every cell in this prison, creating chaos. Then the armory in Section 3, there's a structural weakness you probably created that will get us in. We arm ourselves, free some capable prisoners who won't immediately try to kill us, and then the hangar. We steal a ship." They stood in the debris-strewn shadows, looking at each other. Darius's pulse hadn't slowed since they'd started running. Adrenaline still sang through his veins, but now there was something else mixed in, something hot and urgent. Reyna set her weapon down carefully, stepped closer. Her hand came up to his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a gentleness that contradicted her warrior's build. "I've wanted to touch you for months," she said softly. "Every time I watched you work, seeing your hands move with such precision, watching you hide your rebellion behind compliance, knowing you were fighting when everyone else had given up, I wanted to tell you that you weren't alone, that someone saw you." Darius caught her hand, held it against his face. Her skin was fever-warm, different in texture, smoother, almost like suede. "I saw you too," he said. "Every time you were there, it was like having an ally in enemy territory." "You did have an ally." She leaned in, and Darius's breath caught. Her scent filled his nose, something like cinnamon, and underneath it all something uniquely her. Their faces were inches apart, her eyes searching his, asking a question he desperately wanted to answer. An explosion boomed through the detention block, distant but powerful enough to rain dust from the ceiling. They broke apart, weapons drawn, hearts hammering. Voices echoed through the ruins, close, too close. "Damn," Reyna hissed. "They brought tracking hounds, military grade. They'll follow our scent trail right to—" "Can you shoot out those support struts?" Darius pointed to the weakened structure overhead. "The ones barely holding up that section?" She looked where he indicated, then back at him with admiration in her eyes. "You're going to collapse the tunnel behind us?" "I've always believed in covering my tracks." Reyna raised her weapon, sighted, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The plasma bolts struck true, and metal screamed as stress fractures propagated. The entire section came down with a roar that shook the ground, sealing the passage and cutting them off from pursuit. In the settling dust, Reyna turned to him, her expression fierce and alive. "That was clever. I have my moments. I'm beginning to see that." She moved past him, but her hand brushed his arm in passing, deliberate and promising. "Come on, we have a prison to liberate and an armory to raid. Stay close to me." Darius followed her into the darkness, his skin still burning where she'd touched him, his mind already racing ahead to the next problem. For the first time in 8 months, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting back, and he wasn't fighting alone. The prisoner release went faster than Darius expected. Reyna had override codes that unlocked entire cell blocks with a few keystrokes. Alarms wailed as doors hissed open across 3 levels, disgorging inmates of a dozen species into corridors that hadn't seen this much chaos in years. Some ran immediately. Others gathered weapons from fallen guards. A few just stood in their doorways, disbelieving their sudden freedom. "The hangar is 2 levels up," Reyna said, leading him through the mayhem. "We need to move before." A Krillian enforcer, easily twice Darius's mass and covered in chitinous plating, stepped into their path. 3 smaller aliens flanked him, armed with makeshift weapons. "Well," the Krillian rumbled, "if it isn't Velsharn's pet human and his guard bitch." Reyna's weapon came up, but the Krillian moved fast. He backhanded her across the corridor. She hit the wall hard and went down. Darius grabbed a piece of broken conduit and swung it like a club. It connected with the Krillian's head with a satisfying crack. The alien staggered, more surprised than hurt. Then Reyna was up, movement's pure deadly grace. She swept the Krillian's legs, drove an elbow into his throat as he fell, and had her weapon against his skull before his companions could react. "Move and he dies," she said calmly. The smaller aliens scattered. The Krillian wheezed beneath her knee. "Reyna, we need to go." They ran, weaving through groups of freed prisoners. The prison was eating itself alive. The hangar access was surprisingly unguarded. Reyna sliced through the security with her override codes, and the massive doors ground open to reveal rows of shuttles and patrol craft. "That one," Reyna said, pointing to a sleek courier ship. "Fast, well-armed, and the fuel cells were just—" The plasma bolt took her in the shoulder. She spun with the impact and went down hard. Darius dropped beside her, his hands already moving to assess the damage. The bolt had punched through her left shoulder, cauterizing as it went, but the angle was bad. "Reyna, stay with me." Her face was twisted with pain, but her eyes focused on his. "Behind you," she gasped. Darius grabbed her fallen weapon and rolled, firing blindly. The shots bought him time to drag her behind a maintenance cart. Return fire sparked off the metal. He risked a glance. 3 guards, well-positioned, cutting off their path to the ships. Reyna was bleeding, her green blood startlingly bright against her skin. "Don't move," Darius said. "Let me think." "No time for thinking," Reyna breathed. "Take the ship. Leave me." "Not a chance." He tore fabric from his prison jumpsuit, wadding it against her wound. She hissed, but didn't cry out. Her hand found his, squeezed weakly. "Darius, the codes to the courier ship. 379 Black Delta. Autopilot to these coordinates." She rattled off numbers he committed to memory. "The Resistance will find you. Tell them." "Tell them yourself." He pressed the makeshift bandage against her shoulder and used his belt to secure it. As he worked, his hands encountered something unexpected, a ridge of scar tissue beneath her uniform, just below her collarbone. Old. Deliberate. His fingers traced the pattern, and recognition hit him like a physical blow. He'd seen that pattern before, in intelligence briefings back on New Providence, in classified files about the Velsharn dynasty. Royal bloodline markings. Darius's hands stilled. He looked at her face, really looked, and saw the truth in her eyes. The guilt, the fear. "You're not just resistance," he said slowly. "You're his daughter, Tarn's daughter." Rhaina's eyes glistened, tears mixing with pain. "Yes." The word hung between them. The guards were advancing. Freed prisoners were flooding in from other entrances, drawn by the promise of ships and escape. "How long were you going to wait to tell me?" "I don't know. Maybe never. I thought, if you knew who I was, what I came from, you'd never trust me, never look at me the way you did." Her voice broke. "My father ordered the raid on New Providence. My father—" "Your father is the enemy," Darius interrupted, "not you." "You don't understand. My people will kill me on sight for my betrayal. The resistance barely tolerates me because I have useful intelligence. There's a price on my head from both sides now." Plasma fire raked their position. In the distance, Darius heard shouting, prisoners who'd recognized Rhaina. "Get the Velsharn spawn." "That's the warlord's daughter." Rhaina tried to stand and collapse back, her face gray with pain and blood loss. "Go," she whispered. "Please, Darius, at least one of us can—" Darius hauled her up, ignoring her cry of pain, and half-carried her toward the courier ship. The guards saw them move and opened fire. Darius fired back one-handed, his other arm supporting Rhaina's weight. They were exposed, vulnerable. A plasma bolt scorched past his ear. Another hit the cart behind them, and it exploded in sparks and shrapnel. Darius felt something hot slice across his ribs, but didn't stop moving. They reached the ship's boarding ramp. Rhaina's fingers fumbled with the access panel, smearing green blood across the controls. The ramp started to lower with agonizing slowness. "Almost there," Darius said. The first of the freed prisoners reached them, a Saurian with hate in his reptilian eyes and a length of chain in his claws. He swung at Rhaina's head. Darius intercepted the blow with his arm, felt bone crack, and kicked the Saurian back. The ramp was down. Darius dragged Rhaina up and inside, slapping the close button. The ramp began to rise. A guard had reached the bottom and was climbing aboard. Rhaina, barely conscious, raised her weapon with her good arm and fired. The shot took the guard in the chest and he fell back into the hangar. The ramp sealed with a hiss. Darius laid Rhaina on the deck and ran for the cockpit. He dropped into the pilot's seat and started hitting switches, calling up systems he barely understood. The engines whined to life. Rhaina appeared in the cockpit doorway, one hand pressed to her bandaged shoulder, the other steadying herself. Her face was sheet white, but she was standing. "Move over," she said. "You can't fly this." "You can barely stand." "I can fly better unconscious than most pilots can awake. Move." Darius shifted to the co-pilot seat. Rhaina dropped into the pilot's chair, and her hands moved across the controls with muscle memory that transcended her injury. The ship lifted, swaying slightly, then steadied. "Strap in," she said. The courier ship shot forward through the hangar doors just as they started to close. Metal screamed as they clipped the narrowing gap. Then they were out, climbing hard. Proximity alarms wailed as Rhaina threaded them through a maze of support structures. "They're launching pursuit," Darius said, reading the tactical display. Psst. Rhaina's hands were steady despite the blood seeping through her bandage. She banked the ship hard, pulling them into a vertical climb that slammed Darius back into his seat. The prison facility fell away beneath them, and then they were in open space, stars spreading out in all directions. Behind them, 3 patrol craft emerged from the prison, weapons hot. "Hold on," Rhaina said, and fired the main engines. The acceleration crushed Darius into his seat. The stars blurred, and somewhere behind them, the prison that had held him for 8 months became just another point of light in the infinite dark. Rhaina's hand found his across the center console. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly from shock and blood loss, but her grip was firm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for not telling you, for everything." Darius squeezed her hand, feeling the pulse in her wrist, proof she was alive. "You saved my life," he said. "That's all that matters right now." Her eyes met his, questioning, hoping, "We'll figure out the rest later." The pursuit craft stayed with them for 20 minutes before Rhina lost them in an asteroid field. She piloted with one hand, the other pressed against her bandaged shoulder, her face a mask of concentration and pain. When the tactical display finally showed clear, she slumped in the pilot's chair. "We need to land," Darius said. "That wound needs proper treatment." "There's a neutral trading station 3 hours from here, Tarsus Junction. We can get medical supplies without too many questions." "Can you make it 3 hours?" Rhina's smile was weak but genuine. "I've flown worse in better condition." Darius set the autopilot to the coordinates she provided and helped her to the crew quarters. He eased her onto the lower bunk. Her uniform was soaked with green blood, and when he peeled back the makeshift bandage, the wound was worse than he'd thought. The plasma bolt had shattered bone. "Med kit," Rhina said through gritted teeth. "In the locker, red panel." Darius found it and returned. The kit was military grade, stocked with trauma supplies. He found antiseptic, bone stabilizers, and synthetic tissue patches. "Talk me through it," he said. She did, her voice steadier than it should have been. He cleaned the wound, applied bone stabilizers, and sealed the entry and exit wounds with tissue patches. Throughout it all, she barely made a sound. Only her hand, gripping the edge of the bunk hard enough to leave dents, betrayed her pain. When he finished, Darius sat back. His own ribs ached where the shrapnel had caught him, but compared to Rhina's injury, they were nothing. "Thank you," she said softly. "We're even. You saved my life in the hangar." "I got you shot at in the hangar." "Small detail." She laughed, then winced. Darius helped her adjust to a more comfortable position, acutely aware of how close they were in the small compartment. "Tell me about it," he said. "How did the warlord's daughter end up fighting against her own father?" Rhina was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. "I was 15 when I saw what he really was. He took me to a subjugation campaign. We arrived at a colony world that had refused to submit. The population was mostly civilians, farmers, families." Her hand found his squeezed. "He burned it, all of it. When I asked why, he said it would serve as an example. That fear was the foundation of order. I watched children die, Darius, children who'd never held a weapon, and my father called it necessary." "That's when you turned." "Not immediately, it took years, but I couldn't forget those children. The resistance found me, offered me a chance to make it right. I took it." Darius brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Her skin was fever warm, but her fingers curled around his. "You're nothing like him," he said. "I have his blood, his name. You have your own choices, your own conscience. That's what matters." She looked at him then, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "How can you not hate me? My father destroyed your colony, killed your people. And you spent 2 years undercover in that prison, risking everything to fight against him," Darius interrupted. "You could have lived in comfort and safety. Instead, you chose to be a guard in a hellhole. That takes courage I can barely comprehend. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." She tugged him closer until he was sitting on the edge of the bunk, their faces inches apart. "I thought about this moment," she whispered. "In the prison, watching you work. I imagined what it would be like if we could just talk. Really talk. Look at you the way I'm looking at you now." "Yes." Darius cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Her skin was softer than he'd imagined during all those months of stolen glances. "I saw you too, Rhina. Every time you were there, I worked harder, smarter, because I wanted to impress you. You were supposed to be the enemy." "I was never your enemy." "I know that now." He leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were warm, softer than human lips, and she tasted like copper and something sweet he couldn't name. She made a small sound in her throat and kissed him back, her good hand tangling in his hair, pulling him closer despite her injury. The kiss deepened, became urgent. Months of tension and unspoken desire burned through them both. Darius was careful of her wounded shoulder as he shifted onto the bunk beside her, But Reyna wasn't careful at all. She pulled him against her with a desperation that spoke of how close they'd both come to death. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reyna's eyes were dark with want. "We should rest," Darius said, even as every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. "You're injured." "And I almost died without ever having this," Reyna finished. "Without ever touching you the way I've wanted to for months. I don't want to rest, Darius. I want to feel alive." Her hand found the collar of his prison jumpsuit, tugging him back down. He went willingly, surrendering to the need that had been building since the moment her translator had first spoken his name. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with a tenderness that contradicted the violence of their escape. Reyna guided him, showing him where to touch, how her body differed in small but significant ways. Darius discovered that her skin was sensitive along the ridge of her collarbone, that she made a sound like a purr when he kissed the hollow of her throat, that her eyes flashed brighter when pleasure overtook her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bunk, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist. The ship hummed around them, carrying them toward uncertain safety. "The Resistance coordinates," Reyna said quietly. "When we reach Tarsus Junction, we'll need to make a decision. We can try to make it to the Resistance base, or we can run, disappear." "What do you want to do?" "I want to fight. I want to use what I know about my father's forces to help end this war. But I won't ask you to risk your life again." Darius pressed a kiss to the top of her head. 8 months ago, I would have taken the out. But that was before you, before I remembered what I was fighting for. We deliver your intelligence to the Resistance, together. She tilted her head back to look at him, and the smile on her face was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Together," she agreed. The autopilot chimed. They were approaching Tarsus Junction. Darius reluctantly extracted himself from the bunk and helped Reyna dress in a spare uniform. She moved more easily now, the pain medication doing its work. The station loomed ahead, a sprawling construct of docking bays and trading halls. They docked without incident, paid the harbor master's fee, and made their way into the commercial district. They kept their heads down, moving quickly through crowds. Darius purchased additional medical supplies and food while Reyna acquired new identification documents from a forger who asked no questions. They were almost back to the ship when Darius felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. He glanced at Reyna and saw the same tension in her shoulders. "We need to move," she said quietly. They quickened their pace, but it was too late. A group of aliens in military dress blocked their path to the docking bay, and at the center, flanked by personal guards, stood a figure that made Reyna's breath catch. Overlord Tarn Velsharn stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed on his daughter. Overlord Tarn Velsharn stood like a monument to military might. He was taller than Reyna, broader through the shoulders, his green skin a darker shade that spoke of age and authority. Scars crisscrossed his face. His armor was ceremonial but functional, polished to a mirror shine. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying easily across the station's commerce deck, "you've caused me considerable inconvenience." Reyna's hand moved to her sidearm, but Darius caught her wrist. They were surrounded, at least a dozen guards, all armed. The civilians had already melted away. "Let me guess," Reyna said. "You tracked the ship." "Of course. Did you think I'd leave my personal courier without a tracker? I wanted to see where you'd run. Imagine my disappointment when you headed straight for a Resistance rendezvous point." Tarn stepped closer, his guards moving with him. 2 years, Reyna. 2 years you pretended to serve me while feeding intelligence to terrorists. Do you know how many of my soldiers died because of your betrayal? Do you know how many innocents died because of yours? Reyna shot back. Something flickered in Tarn's eyes, pain maybe, or anger. I built an empire, brought order to chaos, and you, my own blood, chose to tear it down. You built a graveyard and called it peace. Darius assessed their options. The docking bay entrance was blocked. The courier ship was 2 levels below. Even if they could fight their way clear, they'd be dead before they reached the airlock. Unless, his eyes fell on the environmental control panel behind Tarn's position. Emergency venting systems designed to contain fires or toxic leaks. If he could reach it, trigger a localized pressure drop. "And you, human," Tarn said, turning his attention to Darius. "The Providence Ghost. I've read the reports. 40 of my soldiers. Impressive for a mechanic." "I was defending my home." "As was I when I took it. The strong survive, the weak submit or die." "That's not law," Darius said. "That's just cruelty with a philosophy degree." Tarn actually smiled. "I can see why Reyna chose you. You have fire." He drew his sidearm, massive and brutal. "But in this life, you're the man who corrupted my daughter." "I didn't corrupt her," Darius said. "I just fixed her translator so she could finally tell me the truth. Everything she did, every choice she made, that was all her." Reyna's hand found his, squeezed. In that touch, Darius felt everything they'd shared. The desperate escape, the careful tending of wounds, the fierce joining in the courier ship's small bunk. He wasn't going to let it end here. "Final offer, daughter," Tarn said. "Come home, renounce the resistance, help me rebuild what you've damaged. I'll even spare the human, exile him to some distant colony." "You're lying," Reyna said flatly. "You'd execute him the moment I agreed." "Perhaps, but it's still a better offer than you'll get from anyone else. The resistance will never trust the warlord's daughter." "They don't have to accept me," Reyna said. "I'm not doing this for their approval. I'm doing it because it's right." Tarn's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool, and I raised no fools." He raised his weapon, aiming at Darius's chest. Darius moved. He shoved Reyna sideways and dove for the environmental panel, his fingers flying across the controls. Plasma fire scored the air where he'd been standing. Alarms shrieked as he triggered the emergency vent protocol. Atmosphere rushed toward the vents with a roar like a hurricane. Tarn and his guards staggered. Emergency bulkheads started to descend, compartmentalizing the station. Reyna was already moving, firing as she ran. 2 guards went down. Darius sprinted after her, his lungs burning as the pressure dropped. They hit the corridor leading to the docking bays just as the bulkhead sealed behind them. "That won't hold him long," Reyna gasped. "Don't need long, just need to reach the ship." Behind them, the sound of plasma cutters began, Tarn's forces burning through the bulkhead. They had minutes. The courier ship appeared ahead. They pounded up the ramp, and Reyna slapped the emergency launch sequence. The ramp was still rising as the ship lifted from the deck. Darius strapped into the co-pilot seat as Reyna's hands flew across the controls. The station's traffic control was screaming at them. Reyna ignored them, punching the throttle. The ship shot through the docking bay exit just as weapons emplacements came online. Energy beams lanced through space around them. One clipped their port stabilizer, and the ship lurched hard. "Hold on," Reyna said. She put the ship into a spiraling dive that would have been suicidal for any pilot with less skill. The station's weapons tracked them, but couldn't get a lock. Then they were clear, accelerating hard into open space. "He'll follow," Darius said. "I know, but look." She brought up the tactical display. 3 ships were emerging from hyperspace ahead, resistance fighters. "You called them?" "While you were shopping, insurance policy." The resistance fighters moved to intercept, and moments later, Tarn's flagship dropped out of hyperspace behind them, massive, bristling with weapons. "This is Captain Jorel Sane of the Free Colony's Resistance," a voice crackled over the comm. "Courier ship, proceed to our coordinates. We'll cover your escape." The resistance fighters engaged the flagship. Reyna plotted a jump to hyperspace, her fingers steady despite everything. "Reyna," Tarn's voice cut through the comm. "This isn't over. I will find you. I will make you watch as I execute every resistance fighter you've ever helped, and then I will kill the humans slowly while you beg me to stop." Reyna's jaw clenched. She reached for the comm, but Darius caught her hand. "Don't," he said. "He's trying to get in your head." She looked at him, her amber eyes bright. "I just condemned him, my own father. There's no going back." "You condemned a tyrant who happens to share your blood. There's a difference." Reyna pulled him into a fierce kiss as the hyperspace coordinates locked. When they broke apart, her expression was resolved. "Ready?" she asked. She hit the jump, the stars stretched, and they were gone. They emerged 3 hours later at the edge of a debris field that hid the resistance base, a converted mining station. Captain Jarrell Sane met them at the airlock, a grizzled Saurian with shrewd eyes. "Reyna Velsharn," he said, "your intelligence about the prison break triggered chaos across 3 sectors. Every facility in the Empire is on lockdown. You've cost Tarn at least 6 months of operational capacity." "Good," Reyna said simply. Sane's gaze shifted to Darius. "And you're the Providence Ghost. We've been trying to rescue you for months." "I rescued myself," Darius said. "She just helped." "We helped each other," Reyna corrected. Sane led them deeper into the station, past checkpoints and through corridors humming with activity. Resistance fighters of a dozen species worked side by side. "Your intelligence will help us," Sane said to Reyna, "but I won't lie. Many here don't trust you. You're Tarn's daughter. Some will never see past that." "I don't need their trust," Reyna said. "I need their cooperation. I know my father's tactics, his strategies. I can help you hurt him in ways he won't see coming." Sane nodded slowly. "We'll see. For now, you have sanctuary here, both of you." He left them in small quarters, sparse but clean. The moment the door closed, Reyna sagged against Darius, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. He held her, feeling the tremors running through her body. "I shot at my own father," she whispered. "I chose this, but it still hurts." "I know. My family died on New Providence," Darius said quietly. "My parents, my sister, everyone I loved. And you know what? If they could see me now helping the resistance, they'd understand. They'd forgive the pain if it meant stopping others from suffering." Reyna pulled back to look at him, tears tracking down her green cheeks. "How are you so sure?" "Because love isn't about blood, it's about choice. Your father chose power over compassion. You chose to fight for something better. That's what matters." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of gratitude. When she pulled away, she was smiling through her tears. "What happens now?" Darius looked around the small quarters, then back at her. "Now we fight. Together. We use everything you know, everything I can build, to give humanity and every other species under your father's boot a fighting chance. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." Reyna's hand found his, their fingers interlacing. In her eyes he saw hope and determination and something deeper, love, earned through shared danger and impossible choices. "Together," she said. "Together," Darius agreed. Outside their quarters, the resistance base hummed with purpose. Somewhere out in the vast dark, Tarn Velsharn was plotting his revenge. The war was far from over. But for the first time since New Providence fell, Darius Webb felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not just surviving, but fighting. Not alone, but with someone who'd risked everything to stand beside him. He'd been a prisoner for 8 months, he'd repaired her translator, and her first words had changed everything. Now they were free. Now they were together. And now they were going to make the Empire burn.